Let's take a look at some of the primary evidence left behind by the Pompeians. As we look at these pictures, I'd like you to think about what each piece of evidence tells us or suggests to us about life in Roman times, and in what ways Roman life might have been similar or different to our lives today. We're starting off with a picture of a colonnade. A colonnade is a row of columns like this, and it formed part of the Forum. The Forum was a large public square, a bit like the old market square in Nottingham city centre, and it would have been used for meetings, criminal trials, public speeches, and even markets. This picture shows how archaeologists imagine it might have looked before August AD 79, before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And if you look along the edges of the big square here, you'll see the colonnades. People would have been able to walk along under the shade. Many of the streets remain in Pompeii, and here you can see cobbled streets with pavements on each side. In the distance is Mount Vesuvius, the volcano that destroyed Pompeii. In ancient Pompeii and in other ancient Roman cities, there were many types of entertainment. One popular pastime was the theatre, where people went to watch plays. This particular amphitheatre had space for 1,000 spectators. So imagine sitting out there on a hot day watching the performances. This is what the amphitheatre would have looked like originally. Can you remember why the performances only took place during the daytime? Hopefully, you've remembered that of course they did not have electric light in those days, so it would have been impossible to view the performances in the evening, so things like this were done during the day. The Romans worshipped many gods. This particular temple was dedicated to the god Apollo, god of music, and it was built on a high platform to make it look more impressive amongst the other buildings around it. So just like our modern cities, which have gurdwaras and synagogues and churches and mosques, the Romans also had religious buildings which they could visit in their cities. This picture shows how artists and archaeologists believe the Temple of Apollo would have looked originally. Now, of course, cities like ancient Rome or ancient Pompeii did not just have religious buildings and shops and public buildings, they also had the houses of the poor, and of course the houses of the rich. The house of the Vetii was one of the most impressive and richly decorated houses in Pompeii. It was named after its owners from the Vetii family, Aulus Vettius Conviva and Aulus Vettius Restitutus, the house of the Vetii. Here's a cutaway diagram of how the Casa de Vetii, or House of the Vetii, would originally have looked. If we look over on the left-hand side, you can see the open garden with a colonnade around the edge. There was the Roman dining room, which had sloping surfaces around a low table which people could recline upon like couches, so the Romans liked to eat lying down. At the front of the house, you can see there was a reception room or sitting room, which had ornate or fancy decorations. On the right-hand side, you can see another entrance where visitors would be greeted. And there's a shrine where people might worship, and an atrium, which is an open courtyard with an open roof with its own pool, which might have had fish in it, I suppose, not a swimming pool. So the Casa de Vettii, or the House of the Vettii, would have been a very, very grand house. The Romans used mosaics to decorate wealthy houses and public buildings. Each mosaic used thousands of tesserae, very small pieces of tile or stone, to create pictures or patterns. So on the floors, they had mosaics, tiled patterns, and on the walls, they had frescoes, paintings. And here's an example of one of those frescoes, a wall painting. This fresco, in the Casa del Menandro, the house of the Menander family, shows people hunting. If you look carefully, can you see the dogs and the man with a bow and arrow? As we have learnt previously, bread was a very important part of every Roman's diet. At this bakery, in ancient Pompeii, you can see the remains of millstones, which would have been used to grind the grain to make flour. It's probably this bakery that inspired Christina Ballet when she wrote the story of escape from Pompeii. And here's an artist's impression of what that bakery would have looked like originally. On the left, can you see the counter facing out to the street with people buying bread? And in the main room, you can see those millstones with people working around them, pouring grain into the top, and then turning the great millstones, which might have been turned sometimes by humans, or in some bakeries they might have used donkeys for turning them. There's even a chap upstairs pouring grain into the top from the platform. And in the centre of the room, can you see the large oven, the large bread oven, with somebody pushing it in, a bit like a pizza oven really, pushing the bread in. Time to remind ourselves, of course, that fast food is not a new idea. The Romans had fast food over 2,000 years ago. Here, Roman citizens from Pompeii or other cities like Rome could buy quick bites to eat, including breads, cheeses, fish, meat and fruit. So here we see, in the ancient remains at Pompeii, an ancient snack bar. And perhaps these huge containers would have contained food bubbling away with a fire underneath to keep it warm. This is how one artist imagines that snack bar might have looked originally, with the customer sitting around or standing in front of the counter. Can you see the amphorae, the large vases stacked up in the corner, storing herbs and spices perhaps? And there is the shopkeeper and the shopkeeper's wife. He looks like he's reaching into one of the cauldrons to serve some food perhaps. All of these pictures serve to remind us that Pompeii and cities like Rome were very busy places where people could spend money, enjoy themselves, worship, gather around to chat with their friends, and even see punishments going on in the square. Lucius Calvus and his uncle Titus would have been to Rome, and they probably would have known cities like Pompeii had they still been around at the time of Across the Roman Wall. And perhaps they would have missed a lot of those comforts when they went to Britannia